Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jones Zone. Today, we're going to have Lance Indez from Prominent Escrow. This guy's an expert on escrow. Some of you are probably wondering, what the heck does escrow do? I know I do. No, I'm just kidding. They do a lot, believe me. Getting the right escrow company to handle your transaction is so important. Mm-hmm. So what role does escrow company play in a California real estate transaction?
Basically, we're the ones that hold the money while everybody's doing their due diligence. So you have we have a neutral third party, which is escrow. And they facilitate and make sure that we're following the instructions of the buyer, the seller, the lender, whatever title is going to require to ensure the transaction. We just kind of keep all the glue together, if you will.
And the instructions being the contract that the real estate agents provide.
We follow your guys' instructions. Buyer and seller have an agreement between the buyer's agent and the listing agent, and they write those terms up in a purchase contract. We follow those terms and make sure everybody else is following those terms as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everybody to know you're a neutral party.
We're completely neutral because we don't side with either side. We follow what everybody else is asking us to do and make sure everybody's in compliance.
Right. And for example, so if one of either the buyer or seller calls you to ask you to do something, you really can't do it if it's different than the contract.
Exactly. All parties have to agree. They would have to do like an amendment to the contract where they're changing the terms, or maybe they're changing price, or maybe they're changing, we want to do a 45-day escrow instead of a 30-day. Anything. We have to have it all in writing, and everybody has to sign and agree to it.
And part of those terms, obviously, is the price,
right?
The down payment, the length of escrow. You guys have to get what's called a title policy.
Yeah, so that's a lot of people don't know how this works. Southern California is the only place where you actually do escrow separately. We have independent, family-owned. Yeah. And even in Northern California, a lot of the escrow is done by an in-house title company.
For example, New York, they have attorneys.
Attorney state, yeah. So
all of California has escrow companies.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, all of California is escrow, and then for example, states like New York is considered they have attorneys and
Absolutely.
stuff. So
yes.
You just fulfill whatever's in the contract. So how does the escrow process protect both buyers and sellers?
Again, we're following their terms, so we're also neutral, but we also make sure that everybody's getting what they want, and that's what you need. You have someone who has for example, the buyer comes in and they bring a deposit. And that deposit is determined between the buyer and the seller. And they say, okay, we're going to make a $10,000 deposit, earnest money deposit, they call it, or your EMD. Well, that money, once it's in escrow, now we start doing our due diligence and making sure everybody's doing their part. A lot of times we can't really say we have a true valid escrow opened if there hasn't really been a deposit made yet. So the way we protect everybody is to make sure that, hey, seller, the buyer's coming, he's putting some skin in the game, if you will, or he's putting some money in to show good faith that I am interested in buying your property. That's usually how things get started. And so, but yeah, we do that to protect everybody because we want to make sure that the seller is getting what he wants, buyer has to get what he wants. And so, yeah, but it's important to have that neutral third party to do that.
Right. They just facilitate what's in the contract. And then you have to pull what's called a preliminary title report from the title company. The title report, for anybody that doesn't know, the title company just ensures that the owner is the legal owner. Correct. And can transfer the ownership along with making sure all the debts are paid off.
Sure. Yeah, you'll a lot of times you'll have bankruptcies on there, child support payments, judgments.
Typically loans, though.
Yeah,
mostly.
Typically loans. But if you have other items, those need to be addressed and cleared before they can transfer title.
And that's how you protect the buyer.
Exactly.
Right. And actually the seller, too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Sometimes sellers forget what's on there. We've had that happen too. So.
Oh yeah, that's happened quite a bit. So Explain the key responsibilities of the escrow officer.
Officer, they're facilitating everything. They're making sure that things are moving forward on a timeline. We do follow strict timelines. There's contingency periods, which I'm sure you know more about than anyone.
Contingency of inspection, but even though you guys don't necessarily do that, that's something with the real estate agents. But you have to make sure that the prelim is in, the deposit, which we just talked about. You've got to contact all the lien holders, or from that title report, you get the lien holders, typically known as the banks or the loans.
Yep.
And then you contact the banks, right?
And we have to get current payoff demands. Yeah. We have to make sure that those are current, and we have to make sure that taxes are current or paid, or if they're going to be paid through the transfer of escrow. There's a lot of moving parts that they're facilitating behind the scenes.
Yeah, I tell you, having a great escrow officer is such a key ingredient.
And you and I both know we've been doing this long enough to where if you don't have an officer who's proactive and is kind of reactive, then you're having to hold their hand or babysit them during the process. You need an escrow officer who gets what is happening and is usually 1 or 2 steps ahead of everyone to make sure things are moving smoothly. And that's what we pride ourselves on is you're only as good as your service, to be honest with you. It's a service industry. The better we service and respond and are on top of things, the better and smoother the process is for both buyer and seller.
Sure. There's no doubt about that. So what documents and funds are typically handled by the escrow company?
We talked about the deposit already. Documents, again, they're going to order current payoff demands for all the outstanding liens. You have the title insurance preliminary report, which is a report from the title company that tells us, hey, we're willing to insure if you meet these following exceptions or requirements. Usually there's a loan, so we have to follow the lender's instructions too. And the lender starts letting us know, hey, by the way, for the buyer to facilitate this loan, he's going to need to match these following items or get this or get this or get that. And so we follow that and we just make sure that everybody's doing that.
And you're not only in contact with the seller's lender to get the payoff, but you're also constant communication with the buyer's lender.
Exactly.
To make sure that loan's getting processed
Right.
on time and that it closes in time and et cetera. So how does the timeline of the escrow process align with the other stages of the real estate transaction?
It's really just determined on what they're accomplishing. Obviously, if you have a seller who's selling a house and he's in transition to buying a new one too, we try to align that to where they can close escrow and get their keys for their new house, unless there's a seller carryback situation or maybe there's a rent back situation where, hey, we're willing to sell you the house. It's going to close on March 1st, but we need a month still to move and get everything else. If the buyer agrees, again, these are the kind of things that we discuss during that process, and then they have an extra month to live in the home.
What factors should individuals consider when they're choosing an escrow company?
Well, I'm going to be biased, but I'll give you the truth. The truth is, because you're dealing with a very large transaction, it's usually considered people's largest transaction, the buying and selling of their home, right? You want someone completely neutral. We've already kind of touched on that. But I would say you want someone who's not owned by anyone else. They are a standing on their own 2 feet company, family-owned independent escrow company like we are, like Prominent Escrow is, to where there's no bias in this situation. They're not gonna lean more with the seller. They're not gonna lean more with the buyer. They're not gonna lean more towards the lender. They're not gonna lean more towards, the title insurance company. They're gonna be very diligent and neutral and make sure everybody's doing their part. No disrespect to anyone else. A lot of these companies get busy and they have a lot of business and a lot of workflow coming through. Maybe they don't have as much time to be as attentive to your file or your needs because they might have 30 or 40 other files in front of yours. So when you work with us, we make sure that everyone has proper coverage. We have enough assistance and help to make sure that things are moving. We never want the ball left in our court. We want to make sure that that ball is moving forward. And so I would say going with a neutral company who has really good service, turnaround times, responsive, picks up the phone. Really, it's, like I said, it's service. It speaks for itself.
To be blunt, normally I know in my transactions, the clients rarely know an escrow
Right.
company or officer. The
Right.
agents typically develop a relationship with a particular escrow officer and company, and that's oftentimes who chooses the escrow company.
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
going to be based on what you just said as
Yeah.
far as great service. How does an escrow company coordinate with other properties, such as real estate agents and lenders?
Coordinate. Well, there's lots of different types of transactions. Prominent, we can pretty much do any transaction under the sun. But what I mean by that is you might have a vacant land property, not as many moving parts. Maybe it's all cash. Maybe we don't need to work with a lender. Maybe we don't need a lender's requirements. Maybe this person's coming. We've had transactions closed in 3 days before, all cash. Came in, 40 grand, vacant parcel somewhere out in Victorville, whatever. And it's done. And as long as the title insurance says we're in a good position to close and escrow says we're in a position to close, buyer, seller agree, we closed. We're done. So it really just is, again, determined on the nature of the transaction. Sometimes, HOA documents take a long time. Sometimes
That's kind of the new thing that's happening
Yeah.
this year is HOA.
a lot of
We used to-
issues. It sometimes takes 21 days to get
That and
documents.
insurance.
Yes, insurance is another problem. We know in California and Florida, some of the main big insurance brokers have stopped writing policies in these 2 states for right now.
Policies that have forced insurance companies out of the state.
Yeah,
Therefore
so it
making
takes time to get insurance. It takes time to get all the HOA documents aligned and even pulling copies of the seller's documents like we talked about, the trust or the POA if they need that.
power of attorney.
Power of attorney. Yes, sorry, power of attorney. So there's a lot of moving parts, but we correlate or we coordinate with the nature of the transaction. If it's all cash, we can do assignment escrows where we'll have a buyer come in on a contract, and then middle through the contract, he assigns it to a new buyer. That's fine as long as everybody's aware and agrees and signs these terms. There's a lot of different types of transactions that we can help facilitate.
Which is rare, just for those that...
Yeah, it doesn't always happen, but that comes up sometimes. We do wholesale transactions as well. We work with a lot of investors where they're kind of flipping property. They're buying it for a low price. They rehab it. 60 days later, we're
not
back
my
in.
Listings.
Well, not your listings. Yeah, your listings are beautiful.
For a low price.
But yeah, no, we really just, again, it's all determined on the nature of the transaction. It depends on what their terms are, depends on what their goals are. But whatever it is, we help facilitate.
What are the major challenges? I think you may have touched on them. The HOA,
HOAs
stocks.
Are a lot of the HOA problems just because they're busy or they're moving slower than we would like. So sometimes we always tell the clients, hey, if you know you're getting ready to open escrow here within a week or so, give us a chance to call and order ahead of time the HOA docs to get those going. Insurance, like we talked about, is becoming a challenge, but it's still doable. I would say we have a lot of wire fraud situations, and I don't want to get too ahead.
No, that's good. Let's talk about that
want to talk
because
about
that's
that?
a big topic right now. With
So
all
wire fraud is rampant. I mean, as we've all heard in the industry, a lot of the major title companies were recently hit and targeted. They lost 8 to 14 business days of being down because of being hacked by
crooks.
Crooks, yeah. And when that happens is they're not able to facilitate. Everything gets paused and put on hold. You have per diems where they're having situations where now you have someone paying $100 a day because you haven't closed on time and such. So
just so everybody knows, that has to be decided in advance most of the time, or renegotiated if the buyer's not closing on time. But go ahead.
So that is a big challenge. How we combat that is we have $10 million per file in wire fraud insurance and cyber theft protection. Now, because of that, we are, by the insurance companies that we work with that covers Prominent Escrow, we have to facilitate and follow their terms. If we don't, then they wouldn't honor our claim. So it's in the best interest of everybody. I'll give you an example. We will never send our wiring instructions to the buyer's agent because buyer's agents are more public. They're more being targeted by these people. So we usually will say, hey, please give us the cell phone number and email address of your buyer. We'll contact that buyer directly and make arrangements with them. And then we send an encrypted, secured email that only that person can open with the wire instructions. And then as an extra precaution, before they hit the send button, when they go to the bank and they're initiating the wire transfer, we say, please call us one more time while you're at the bank. Read back that routing number, read back that account number and the amount you're wiring to make sure it matches what we have. Because once you press send, you're at the mercy of whatever could happen. So we do, again, these are additional steps that we take to protect everybody involved. And heaven forbid there is a claim, we can follow it and say we did our due diligence.
Yeah, it's funny. I think from what I understand, the crooks have gotten so savvy is that they'll hijack escrow officer's email, real estate agent's email, principals, seller and buyer's emails, and they'll make it, for example, let's say it's Lance prominentescrow.com. They'll do Lance I prominentescrow.com. So
they'll put a decimal point or they get very creative.
Yeah. I had one that was caught
Oh, really?
Around $1 million. The buyer was going to send over $1 million to the crooks, and luckily it was caught.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's quite a...
I know in some of the questions we were discussing situation, knock on wood, it hasn't come up to us, but I did hear of a story. I got a client the hard way. When I say that, she called me and she says she went through a situation where they got hacked and she didn't know and the escrow officer didn't know. And she was mortified.
She was an agent?
She was an agent.
Okay.
And I've been calling on her for years. Hey, I'd love a chance to work with you sometime. Sure. Told her about our wire fraud insurance and everything. And she says, okay, I'm only going to be using you going forward. And I said, why? And she says, because I had a really bad situation and they didn't have insurance. They were relying on E&O insurance. E&O does not cover wire fraud.
Errors and omissions.
Yes, errors and omissions. Sorry. So many terms that we use on a daily that we...
That's all right.
So she had a situation where the buyer wired in $26,000. That was their EMD amount.
Earnest money.
Earnest money deposit. Yes, sorry. And gone. And they didn't even know about it. They have to go back and rent now for 2 years because they can't afford to buy anything. And they lost that. They're out that money. That's what I'm saying. It's so important to work with a company that has that insurance because you can file a claim and usually get that money back. But the problem is if you're going out there without it, you're taking a huge risk. And again, it wasn't even the poor officer's fault. She didn't even know she got hacked for like a day or two. And then the money was already gone. Poof, gone. Can't trace it.
It's not always the escrow officers that's
Right.
hacked. It's the buyer, the seller, the real estate agents, etc. So what challenge or complications can arise during the escrow process, and how are they typically resolved?
We've had situations before where you get into a transaction and a buyer and seller, for whatever reason, don't see eye to eye anymore. Or maybe the buyer is dragging his feet and promising that I'm gonna buy your property, but I'm taking my sweet time. I'm not following the contract. We've had situations before where, the seller wants to cancel and go with a different offer, but we can't because the buyer has their money in escrow with us. So again, this is where we stay neutral. We can't side with it. We only can cancel an escrow if both parties agree.
In fact, on that note, you can't do anything without both parties agreeing.
Yeah, and we've had situations where people will go, oh, well, we're just going to go open it somewhere else in another escrow company. Okay, you can do that. But in theory, if you close on that and these other two buyers and sellers have not rectified their situation, they can take you to court. And then we don't want to be responsible as well. So we're going to take our precautions to cover ourselves. But that's a situation that comes up. So what we do is we implore both parties, hey, listen, buyer doesn't want to move forward, seller doesn't want, whatever the case may be, please come to some sort of agreement. And if that's a matter of losing your EMD, then so be it. But that's a tough one that comes up from time to time. And it's challenging because the poor seller wants to move forward. They may have timelines in mind where they're having to move out of state or relocate for work, and they need that money. Or maybe they are trying to, just like I said, to sell the house. And now they're stuck waiting for the buyer to do his due diligence. So again, as you mentioned, it's really good that these things are addressed up front and very clear expectations are set so we can anticipate what buyer and seller are going to be needing before we get this process started.
Now, I'm guessing a lot of people are also going to want, what are the costs, the typical costs
Great
of
question.
an escrow?
This is such a big topic because people are always trying to save money. Obviously,
There's certain standard fees.
Yeah, there's a standard. So basically, we were at $2 per thousand for a very long time, over 10 years. We recently increased our fees to $2.50 per thousand just because of the cost of living and so forth. So you take a $500,000 transaction. We would do $250 times the 500, and then we have a $300 base. And the base covers other miscellaneous fees. You're probably looking at around $1,600 for the escrow fee. Obviously, the higher the purchase price, the higher the escrow fee goes. But then we always try to work with our clients as well in different tiers. The higher the price, if it's over $1 million, for example, we might be able to reduce that amount. So we're not charging them the full $2.50 per thousand. It really just depends on the circumstances. So yeah, I would say typically it's about what was the formula?
$2.50 per thousand, and then a $300 base.
There used to be a formula. I forget. It was like 0.5% of the purchase price.
Oh,
would be your closing costs, something like that. I will say one of the greatest things that we do offer is a concierge signing service. So we will go.
So a lot of escrow companies.
A lot of companies can do that. Yes, we'll go to the seller's house anywhere in the state of California or place of work. During COVID, we would meet them sometimes at the park, at a park bench, and help them sign and notarize their grant deed, their escrow package. But that has become such a staple, I would think, because a lot of times a seller hasn't sold a property in a long time. They may not be familiar with these documents. And real estate agents are usually busy doing other transactions as well. So we always say, hey, let us handle that for you. We will go right to your client and hold their hand during this process, get the wet signature taken care of on the grant deed, take care of the seller's package. The only form that we're not allowed to advise on is the 593,
which is
their tax form, how they want their taxes withheld or their withholding. That's something they have
or
to.
You can't also tell them how to take title. That's
exactly.
a legal term.
Yeah, they have to tell us. Yeah. And so, but yeah, it's such a streamlined, smooth process. You can still send a seller to a UPS store or to a bank, anyone that can do a notary. But recently, again, we've talked about the title companies. There's been a lot of situations where they do not accept the grant deed signature from that particular notary for whatever reason. Maybe that notary is not in good standing, or maybe he's not on an approved list. Yeah. So I always tell friends, I go, Now you have to have it redone, and it just takes more time, So it's always good to go through someone who's approved, who's in good standing, who, because we've had situations where title won't accept the grant deed. They say, "Oh, this notary is not in good standing." It happens. So.
Just so everybody knows, it's because I've sold a lot of properties where people are out of state. They say, well, do we have to come back to close this? No, actually, you don't. You can. The main thing, other than the first set of escrow instructions, I guess you can call it, and then the grant deed, they have to do it in the notary. But we've had plenty of people be out of state, and we line them up with a notary from.
We'll even do it for them. We'll call them. We'll coordinate a local notary wherever they are. We had one in Maine. I found a local notary up in Maine. We overnighted a FedEx prepaid return envelope for them. Did all the hard work for them. All they had to do was sign, stick it in the envelope, and we took care of it.
Yeah. And then buyers typically are in town, but they too don't have to be in escrow.
They don't have to be in town or in the state. Theirs is a little bit more complicated though, because they have the loan documents, you have the escrow instructions as well. But they're typically you're signing more of a thicker packet of documents than the seller.
Yeah, those loan documents. I remember when I did a refinance, all I did, and I trusted the escrow officer, so I didn't have to. I just said, show me the rate, show me the term. So I saw the rate and the 30 years fixed.
Sure.
And then I just signed, and it took me a half hour.
Sign it. I know.
Without questions.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So obviously having a great escrow company and even more importantly, a great escrow officer it's funny. I was thinking on the way over here about our conversation, and I thought, it's kind of like I'm the coach and they're the quarterback. And then I thought, gosh, no, I think they're the coach and I'm the quarterback. It's so important. When you get a great escrow officer, it just provides for such a smoother transaction and smoother, less problems when you get someone that knows what they're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say most of the officers we work with have at least 10 to 15 years, if not more, experience in doing this. So there's a lot of scenarios and situations that they've come across that they're educated on. And I think that's critical because it helps. They can answer so many more questions. They can make the process so much more smoother for the buyer and seller because it can be a nerve-wracking time. This is a stressful situation. You have a seller who's lived in a house for 20 years, hasn't sold. You have a buyer who's never bought a house before, is nervous, excited, but nervous. So the more people you have helping hold their hand during this process, I think is huge. It makes it a better experience for everyone. And then I'll be honest with you, Darryl, you and I have been friends a long time. The better your service vendors, because let's just be honest, that's what escrow is. We're a service vendor, we're a provider. The better we make the transaction for you and your clients, the smoother and easier it is for them, the more likely you're going to get more referrals from their friends and families because, I worked with Darryl Jones and his whole team of people he trusted, and the process was smooth, and it was great. I would highly recommend it to anyone. Whereas people sometimes hang on to the one negative thing in a transaction, and we want to make sure that's never on us because we want to make sure we're doing our best. Because if we do, they are 10 times more likely to refer you. And that's I think that's what our mentality is at Prominent is we strive to go, how can we help make the real estate agents who are bringing us these opportunities, which we're very grateful for, how can we make them look better? How can we make things easier for them?
There's no doubt. I mean, having the right escrow officer that can alleviate, and I know I've had transactions where everything was beautiful. I mean, we got them a much higher price than they anticipated. Everything was smooth as can be. It wasn't on the market forever. We really nailed down the negotiations, et cetera. And then at the very end, it doesn't close on time because an escrow officer messed up on something.
Or missed the document or forgot something small.
Oh, yeah.
And it can be a nightmare. I would say, again, the better we communicate, the better that we are available. And that's another thing I'll pride ourselves on is answering our phones. Our team, even after hours on the weekends, you can always get a hold of myself or anyone else. We are there to help make sure that people have their questions answered, even if it's something small. Sometimes it could just be a peace of mind factor. Hey, did the loan docs come in? Great. Okay. Have a good weekend. I'll see you on Monday. Sometimes people just want to be reassured.
Peace of mind.
Yeah. And we do that.
Well, on that note, tell our listeners if anybody has a question about something we may not have covered or they want to contact you because they think you're so cute.
Oh, gosh. Those days are over.
How do we get a hold of Lance?
Well, I'm at 714-423-6882 is my cell phone.
What is that again?
714-423-6882. 888-288-6882 is my cell phone. Call me anytime, or you can email me at lance@prominentescrow.com.
Well, I want to just thank you so much
of
for
course.
coming here and doing this.
So much
Like
fun.
Lance had mentioned previously, we've known each other for quite a while now. And in fact, on the way here, I thought, because I'll ask my guests, have you done a podcast to find out the comfort level? And I thought, wait a minute.
We have,
Lance
yeah.
and I, around 10 years ago, did
Did
a
it.
radio show together.
It was awesome.
Yeah,
The Ron
so-
Siegel show. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
so
was fun.
we did have that. So, hey, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful. It was
Well,
fun.
I appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions, contact me or Lance. And please hit the subscribe button if you found this useful. We got a lot of other great shows. Take
Thank
care,
you, Darryl.
everybody.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.